Good shot, kid. I think you got him. Good shot, kid. I think you got him.
Hello there and welcome back to some more Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Today we'll continue on Let's Play, and this is episode 78. In today's episode we are taking a look at the flying races. These only have one location in the entirety of San Andreas, and it's here at the Las Venturas airport. There is 6 of these to do, and the first one is called World War Ace. So the flying races are actually a fair bit different from the street races that we're used to. In the street races you're competing against 5 other opponents in order to score that prize of $10,000. The aerial races are a lot more like time checkpoint runs, and I say time checkpoint runs, there's not actually a time limit on all these. It's a lot like Chopper Checkpoint from Vice City in that aspect. They essentially give you an aerial vehicle, give you a bunch of checkpoints, and then it's your job to finish it in the best time possible. Other than destroying these vehicles, abandoning them, so on and so forth, the usual ways you get disqualified from a race, there's no way to fail these. As long as you cross the finish line at some point, it doesn't matter. So you can take your sweet time with this, which is useful because the aerial vehicles in this game are not the easiest of things to fly, and I'll detail when that comes into effect later on. But for now, our first race involves the Rustler, which is essentially a World War II style Mustang Spitfire style warplane, and it's actually a pretty easy vehicle to fly. That's why they give you it in a lot of the flying school missions. It's not the quickest thing in the world, but it is one of the more stable vehicles. It has got guns on it as well, although they're not particularly useful. Yeah, this one is just a pretty easy run through the city and into the countryside. Once you're in the countryside, do be aware of trees. Once you're in the city, be aware of skyscrapers. That's sort of your biggest issue trying these aerial races. It's the fact that they try and get you to pilot these things around slightly tricky objects. If these were in the middle of the water, then they'd be very easy. So again, the one thing to remember with this is you pick your own pace. As long as you cross the finish line at some point, it doesn't matter. You can dictate the pace. You can go as slow as you want, you can go as quick as you want, you can miss a checkpoint for half an hour, go have dinner and come back. You'll still be fine. So do bear that in mind. There's no real... the limiting factor here is yourself, essentially, and your ability to fly. But fortunately, World War Ace is a pretty simple one. I believe it ends at this checkpoint here, and yeah, you do get $10,000 for winning these races, I guess, for each completed run. So it's a pretty easy way to make money, in the sense that there's not really much difficulty in terms of the AI being the difficulty. It's more your ability to fly is called into question here. The next race is called Barnstorming, and this one is slightly more difficult because while the plane is slightly slower in the form of the stunt plane, the stunt plane is a lot trickier to fly because it's a lot more sensitive. Of course, it's a stunt plane, it's meant to do barrel rolls and loop-de-loops and stuff like that, and it doesn't particularly bode well for like actual flying purposes. Now don't get me wrong, you can press the right stick down and eject some red smoke if you so feel inclined. Unfortunately that smoke only comes in red, but yeah, it's not a particularly great plane to fly this. You'll see me having difficulties with it here. Hopefully some of you are much better pilots than I am and you won't really have too many issues with this. As you used to be a better pilot than this, it's just for whatever reason during these flying races my piloting skills for some reason went a little bit out the window, so I apologise for the bad flying that you're going to be seeing during this. But then again, if I'm flying badly, at least it proves that eventually with hard work and persistence you too can fly these planes through these checkpoints. Lovely. Anyways, yeah, like I said, this one a little bit more difficult. It's also a longer run. This one is actually 12 kilometers. I believe World War Ace was only a 6 kilometer race, although it does get a lot harder from here. So if you can complete Barnstorming, then good news, you are capable of moving on to what's coming next, because oh dear, there's 2 of these that are really awkward, and it isn't this one. So again, it's another race where it sort of gets you to fly around the country, watch out for trees, Watch out for pop-in as well. I should mention that because, of course, if you're playing the PS4, PS2 version, whatever, if you're playing a console version of this game, let's put it that way, pop-in is something you're definitely going to have to contest with because the draw distance in this game is pretty darn bad. Not quite sure. I can't really remember what it's like on the remastered versions, which of course these missions are all on and you can play through that way if you so desire. I just chose not to because I prefer the way this version plays, and if you're on PC you can customise your own draw distance, so unless you're running some form of desktop from the year of 2003, you should be able to run with a good enough draw distance to see these trees, and let's be honest, who is watching this on a 2003 computer? No offense to you if you are. Maybe you're one of those people who still think San Andreas is a brand new game and you're just watching it in the year 2021. Like an Amish, but for the year 2000. That's not a bad idea, actually. Maybe I should have done that. Such simpler times, wasn't it, 2004? We could all be sat here playing our Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, watching... I don't know, what did people watch in 2004? Comment down below with your favourite shows from the early 2000s. I don't even know, some of you might not have even been alive in the early 2000s, which is terrifying to me. But yeah, no, we could all be sat there, driving around in our Honda Civic hybrids, with the manual transmission, IMA executives. Simpler times. Simpler times. So, either way, we're in the year, well, currently of 2021, so we're not doing that. Instead, we're playing San Andreas on YouTube for all of you lovely, lovely people. I have no idea what that rant was about, but in truth, there's not really too much to say about these flying races. There's just not a lot to them. It's pilot a plane through a bunch of checkpoints. Don't get me wrong, it can be difficult, but ultimately there's not really much I can recommend other than improve your flying. There really isn't much. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing with this. There's no AI to take out, you know, it's not like the previous episode where I can just say, oh, just shoot the faster vehicle, because there is no faster vehicle in this. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, there's no AI to race against, because I can't even begin to imagine what racing AI would be like in planes. They can't drive very well, let alone fly, so yeah, that's a terrifying prospect, but there's not too much of these, there really isn't. It's just a case of how good you are and your personal endurance and your ability to fly. But either way, we are coming towards the end of Barnstorming. Now, you might notice some of these checkpoints are positioned quite low. I think they're trying to get you to perform stunts while doing this. I wouldn't recommend that if you're not too confident flying this thing. So, you know, if a checkpoint is down below, just simply go for it and then sort of spin straight upwards so you don't have to fly underneath the bridge. Of course, you want to make sure not to hit the bridge on the way up, but for a lot of these, that's the way to do it. You might also sort of notice, I would use the rudder more on the stunt plane, which for some reason I wasn't doing, because the rudder is the best way to position this thing, because if you try and turn left or right, it'll just send it off into a big sort of stunty-like spin. As you can see here, do a nice little celebratory loop-the-loop. Anyways, that one was setting you all up for what comes next, because what comes next, oh boy, is the 17-kilometer long military service, which gives us the Hydra. Now, for those of you who haven't driven the Hydra by this point in the game, and that's probably going to be honest with you, if you're following this game as we are doing, you haven't yet. The key to the Hydra is being able to utilize its different modes. So it is a VTOL, which essentially means it can do vertical takeoffs, which you saw just there. In order to get the Hydra to do a vertical takeoff, well, that's its default position. If you push the stick upwards, you'll send it into jet mode, and if you pull the right stick downwards, that will send it into hover mode. Now, hover mode, probably the safest way to do this, but if you want to get this finished by sometime in the next year, then you are going to have to use the jet mode. And while the jet mode is cool, it's also very, very quick. And quick, as we've established before, is very terrifying in these planes. You can use square to slow them down, and in fairness to the Hydra, because it's so quick, it will hover for a decent while. Obviously, you don't want to press square forever and ever and ever, because eventually the plane will just sink to the ground. But another thing to bear in mind is you don't have to apply any acceleration whatsoever. You might notice you can hear sometimes the sound will go out. I'm sort of here. You might notice I'm not really using the sound. That's because I'm not accelerating at all. I'm simply just sort of keeping my finger off the stick, and it will. I don't want to call it autopilot because obviously it isn't, but it will keep itself in the air. Let's put it that way. As long as you don't like hold square, because eventually if you hold square too much, it'll just plummet to the ground. But if you need to slow it down, then it is there. Definitely, and I do recommend using it if you do need to slow this down, which there is a potential because it is very quick and they do get you to fly excessively low during this. Essentially, you're going around the desert, some parts towards San Fierro. Once again, just bear in mind, pop-in distance. A lot of these checkpoints are also low in attempts to make you perform spectacular things. You might notice I've gone under a few bridges during this. Unlike in the stunt plane, there's no real way to avoid that at this point, so just keep your wits about you. Don't fly over that restricted area, whatever you do, because the last thing you need during this is getting rockets flung at you. There are flares on board the Hydra, but I can't remember quite how you're supposed to use those, so don't recommend. But yeah, it's a little bit of a terrifying one, this, and if I recall correctly, this will make you do this all over again. So you start at the abandoned airfield, and then essentially loop around again for another run out. You can see we're sort of going over the abandoned airfield now, and now we're going to head once again back towards San Fierro, though this time we're actually going to be going over land as opposed to going over the sea, which again sort of draw distance on and so forth. In the desert there's not really trees, so you'll get along better on that front. However, there is sort of certain electrical wiring, telephone poles, stuff like that to keep your eye out for. So do be aware of flying a little bit too low, but fortunately, yeah, you would sort of end up back over the ocean eventually. I did manage to cock this one up a few times. The ending point for this is actually just beyond Mount Chiliad, so it's a bit of a weird one, the fact that you loop around to the abandoned airfield and then come back round. It's a bit strange, but that's the way it is, that's the way it's done. But yeah, overall, it's a lot easier in the second half of it. The first half's probably where you're going to cock this one up. Second half, as soon as you've sort of done the loop around the abandoned airfield and heading back out, the only thing you really have to pay attention to is draw distance issues that you could potentially have. But other than that, this one is a pretty simple one, and eventually we're going to hit the ending checkpoint. A well-deserved $10,000, and do yourself a favour, don't do what I do here, because otherwise you're going to end up in a hospital, which is going to cut down on your time to complete this. So next up, we head off to the helicopter portion of this, because we're finally done with planes, which is actually where most of the issues come from this. So from now on, easy sailing, right? Well, not quite. There's a few other issues that are going to arise from this. But either way, the first one of these is a chopper checkpoint, which is easy because it gives you the Maverick, which, again, a lot like the Rustler from the start, isn't statistically the best helicopter in the game. However, it is the most stable. And the nice thing with a helicopter, it isn't quite as quick. You can also hold the left thumbstick down, and that will sort of turn the helicopter into hover mode. So the tail will push down, and then it'll come to a complete halt vertically, if that makes sense. So that is something that you should take advantage of. If the chopper does go a little bit too quickly, if you need to go and get a checkpoint that you've left behind, the hover mode can sort of revert your momentum, and you can make it a lot easier in that aspect. But ultimately, for chopper checkpoint, there isn't too much to discuss here. Another nice thing with the helicopters as well is they can take a lot more of a beating than the planes can. Don't get me wrong, if you get the rotors caught, you've only got a limited time before things are going to go very bad and you're going to explode a lot, but they can take a lot more of a beating than the planes can. The planes essentially just boil down to, if you have one head-on collision, you're dead. If you collide with a telephone pole or something, you're dead. In a helicopter, not so much. These things can take a lot more punishment, which is nice, and it's why it's my more preferred method of transportation in this game. But yeah, the Maverick is just a good all-round helicopter. Maybe it's a little bit big, and that's sort of the issue you're going to have with these, is the bulk of a helicopter is more than a plane, if that makes sense. Even though technically a plane is bigger, the helicopters feel bigger, they feel heavier as well. So it's just a case of trying to get used to that, but ultimately it does have to be said the helicopter portion of this is a lot easier than the plane portion of this, and you're also less likely to die. If you do cock this one up, chances are it's just a case of blowing the helicopter up and starting it again. And that's if you want a perfect run, and as we mentioned, there's no opponent in this one, they're just pure time trials, so there's not really too much to this. You don't have to worry about popping all that much. Obviously you don't want to collide with trees and stuff like that, but you do have to be less aware of that in a helicopter than in a plane, and also because a helicopter is naturally slower, chances are the object will have more time to pop in as well, so that's less of an issue. But overall, yeah, not too much more to discuss in terms of Chopper Checkpoint. It's a pretty easy, fun little excursion in a good helicopter, which we've seen several times. Of course, we've flown several helicopters as well by this point. The ending point is not too far away from the abandoned airstrip, and it's one of the quickest ones as well. Not quite as quick as the Rustler one, but yeah, it's pretty quick, pretty good. Next up, we move to another sort of Chopper Checkpoint style mission, which is actually equally as long as well, which is nice, and this one circles around San Fierro. It is called Whirlybird Waypoint, and this one actually gives us a unique vehicle, much like the Phoenix in the San Fierro portion of the street races. This is your first and only chance, in legitimate methods, to fly the news helicopter in this game, and that of course means that if you want to get this vehicle, simply fly it to the abandoned airstrip, blow it up, and then it'll be in your garage when you leave, which is something fun you can do. The news helicopter, you might think it's a normal Maverick. It isn't. It's essentially a reskinned version of the VCN Maverick from Vice City, which comes with its own issues. So this is slightly harder than Chopper Checkpoint. Not only do you have to contend with buildings this time round, you do have to fly the news helicopter, which, while smaller, which is a good thing for negotiating buildings, it is a lot harder to fly. Because it's smaller, you can essentially nosedive this thing if you push too much forward. You might see me do it a few times, where essentially the skirts of the helicopter rise up and essentially go to a 90-degree angle, so you do need to watch that a little bit. If you accelerate, usually that will get it out of that, but it's something to bear in mind. I also don't think it's quite as strong as a standard Maverick, so that's something to bear in mind. But hey, it looks cooler than a standard Maverick. I love this white and blue colour scheme they've given the Sand News helicopter. There is a way to obtain this sort of without getting it from this race, however, it essentially involves some pretty expert timing in terms of hijacking one of these from the sky, and it's a lot harder to get than a police helicopter, which you can also hijack in that way, although the police helicopter does have a legitimate spawn point later on in the game, which I'm sure I'll point out at some point. But yeah, if you want a interesting helicopter, this is the way to get one, the Sand News Chopper from this one. Anyways, we're going back towards Gant Bridge now, which is essentially where this one ends. Just keep an eye on buildings, keep an eye on draw distance, and also try to get used to the way the News Chopper flies, because it is an interesting vehicle with some weird pitch dynamics. But overall, there's not really too much to this to say, and it has to be said. So yeah, I don't really have anything more to say in regards to this. Again, the helicopter missions, thankfully they don't give you some of the more arsey helicopters in this game. They give you pretty decent choppers, although saying that, while they do give you decent choppers, they don't always give you the best conditions to fly in, as you'll see in a second. But either way, as we come back down towards Paradiso, we're going to hit the final checkpoint, another $10,000, and again, you can constantly replay this, so if you do want to get the News Chopper, it isn't just a one and done. You can go ahead and do that afterwards. However, we now come on to Heli Hell, which its name isn't too far off actually. This requires you to fly the Hunter helicopter which is one of the best helicopters in fact, it is the best helicopter in the game, because it's got guns and missiles on it and stuff. However, flying it around the city, not quite so good. So, it is very, very quick, the Hunter. Another thing the Hunter is also very big, and that's where your issue arises here. All these checkpoints are very, very low to the ground. There's lots of skyscrapers in Los Santos, lots of trees, and it essentially, as you can see, it wants you to fly it between buildings, which, no. Yeah, this one is very, very tricky indeed. Maybe not quite as tricky as military service, but for me it really isn't far off. I actually forgot how much of a nightmare this one is, because you wouldn't really expect it to be. It sort of sneaks up on you, this one. Usually the races only have like one real hard one at each location, but this is the issue there. Also, that building's quite cool, that sort of skyscraper style business building near Glen Park. I always wanted to go inside as a kid because the actual interior of it's quite well modelled. It reminds me a lot of the Menendez hideout in Vice City Stories, where the final mission takes place. So there's a bit of a shame you can't go inside that building. I wonder if the developers ever wanted you to. I'm just trying to ramble as you get over my awful flying as I try and fly underneath the Mulholland section. There is a high chance during this that you're going to have to do this more than once because you're going to damage the Hunter beyond repair. Another nice thing with the Hunter is it is very durable as a helicopter. I believe it's the second or third most durable helicopter in the game. Technically the Cargo Bob is the most durable in terms of like missiles and stuff like that. But it's also one of the worst helicopters in the game. This one, very good helicopter, however there's a chance you are going to critically damage this thing from just smashing it into things because, again, you know, flying under the Mulholland intersection in this is not fun. Flying in between buildings in this is not fun. Usually I like to be in the sky using the machine guns to take down vigilante victims in this Hunter helicopter as opposed to actually flying it competitively throughout the sky. Yeah. This one is it's not so much fun, it has to be said. I mean, once you finish it, you'll get a sense of pride and accomplishment, but in terms of doing it in the moment, yeah, this one isn't fun. You do get to see some interesting sights in Los Santos, which is an area of the map which, you know, it seemed when we was first here, maybe we didn't explore it so well. Well, I mean, we're going back, there's no real secret, we're in Mad Dog's mansion. In the storyline of the game so far, so we are going to be coming back here and exploring a little bit more of what Los Santos has to offer, but yeah, hopefully no more of our Los Santos tour will be as painful as trying to fly around it in this Hunter helicopter. Another thing to note as well is it can do what the Maverick can do, or the News Maverick can do, where essentially it sort of pitches itself upwards. You can make the Hunter helicopter do a roll. I don't recommend doing that because it's very, very terrifying when it does decide to do that, but once again, just sort of use your self-leveling, don't push the stick too far, and you should be alright. You'll get this one eventually, but this is one of the trickiest flight races in the game. But fortunately, once you finish this, you are done with the flying races. That's the last of these checkpoints to do, and we now only have one more location to do any form of racing, which is nice and something that we'll consider something we will cover at a later date. Anyways, that is it for this episode. Thank you all very much for watching. Try to beat my best times if you want, it shouldn't be too difficult, and join us next time when we're going to be wrapping up Las Venturas by taking a look at buying some property, so join us for that. Until then, farewell.
Down, speeding all around. The naked 47 got the power and it's bound to move any mother that gets in my way. Just another power machine on the freeway. Riding with me, there's my MC homeboy. Knowing the rules ain't part of his program. Finding the right way around this map might be pretty hard cause he's fucked on crack. Gee, Grand Theft Auto.